At some point, I need to go back to using the original. I probably should have done that during the winter. The original headphone cups for these things. I bought the cooling gel ones, and they're just really nice. Like, keeps everything nice and cool.
Yep.
I like my headphones. My only complaint is that they don't fold down, and so traveling with them is weird.
Yeah.
And if I put them in a case, it'd be even weirder. Mm-hmm. It's been generally fine, but
yeah. These ones I have, the Audio-Technica ones do fold down, and I definitely have used that in the past.
And also, like, the cable is permanently attached.
Oh, that's a big problem, actually.
Yeah. So those are my two giantest complaints about the Beyerdynamic 770s.
Yeah. Otherwise, you really like them.
Otherwise, I really
it took
like
you
them.
a long time to buy good headphones. A very long time.
Yeah, and
I used to use those little like cheapo plastic whatever things.
Yep. I've been exceptionally happy with these, and I think that I'm more like, I've tried the Audio-Technica ones that you have, and like they don't, like, these just fit better.
Yeah.
They fit more securely. They feel sturdier, and I kind of just like them more.
Yeah. Reasonable.
But I think that those things come at the cost of flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I don't like about the Audio-Technicas is they tend to reproduce a little bit too much at the high end. Like, compared to most speakers I've heard, you get, like, things just sound a little bit more shrill in these. And so
yeah, I can see that.
when you edit audio, you have to keep that in mind. And, it's like, if it sounds a little sharp to me and like a little bit too high end, I have to remember, like, that's okay. Because whenever you listen to it on laptop speakers or on phone speakers or whatever, like, it's going to sound normal.
I wonder if I've always wanted the fuzzy gray cups that the DT, like, there's, like, if you get the 770s, but you have to get the high end version, like, not the 200 ohm. I have, like, the 70 ohm or the 20 ohm. I can't remember
the filthy casual ones.
Yeah. Maybe. Do I have 80 ohm? Let me look real quick. I have the 32 ohm.
Oh, 32 ohm.
What? I mean, like, I'm not.
As if.
What? I mean, that thing, the stupid thing that I'm connected to right now, that probably can't even put out 200 ohms.
That's probably true.
I'm not even going to look. I was going to look. What is that?
This is a Zoom PodTrack P4.
Zoom PodTrack P4 maximum headphone. It would be so quiet. Like, you wouldn't be able to balance them.
Yeah, you're probably right. While you're looking this up, so we potentially could balance them just because this has independent headphone outputs.
Oh, that's actually huge. Remember the one that before it didn't have that?
Yeah, we had to argue over what volume to have the headphones.
A little rough.
That's the advantage to getting a podcast recorder rather than using something like a Zoom H5, is that this PodTrack P4 has 4 independent headphone outputs, and they each have their own volume, and so you can set all that appropriately.
I don't know the syntax to type an omega. So I can't search for it.
The term you want is impedance.
Impedance.
Yep. I've thought about getting the Rode version of this, which is like the Rodecaster or whatever. And it seems like it has some pretty cool features, but for what we do, like, this PodTrack P4 works really well, and it was surprisingly cheap. It was like maybe $150. I don't know. It was cheaper than a Zoom handy recorder. And besides not having 32-bit float, it's great.
Imagine I had 32-bit float, though. Our podcast would be so much better, because then I could shout.
Not that you don't already, but
then I could really just let go.
It'd be
no more holding back.
Yeah, I've thought about switching to that, but the headphone thing has stopped me.
The input impedance is 3,000 ohms.
Yeah, that's different. That's for the microphones.
The input output impedance is 10 ohms for headphones. 10.
I don't know what that means in terms of like are those supposed to match?
No, that just means that it outputs at 10 ohms. And I'm 32. I'm probably a third. I don't know if this is logarithmic or not. I'm probably a third quieter, at least, maybe 300% quieter.
And so here's what's interesting. Looking at I can see the levels that I have these things set at. On a scale of 1 to 10, mine is on like a 6, and yours is on a 3.
Interesting. What do you know what the impedance is of your filthy casual headphones?
I don't. These are Audio-Technica ATH M50s. M50X, actually.
This is really good radio. 38 ohms, according to the first thing that comes up in Google, which is a scrub from the Audio-Technica website.
Maybe I just like the volume louder than you.
Maybe.
That must be what it is.
I have sensitive ears, Daniel. I don't know if I have a pre-show.
Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're here today to talk about the gear, software, and techniques we use to shoot photos and video.
I have both my laptop and my iPad today. And I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here on my iPad, but look at this bad boy.
Oh, you've got a timer. That's a big timer, too. I like it.
Full screen, all 12.9 inches. Now, just a stopwatch.
I'm a little curious because of the time that I saw in there. What was your criteria for when you started that timer?
I just followed my heart, Daniel.
Okay, because it doesn't line up with with how long we've been recording. So,
well, no, normally it would line up with the show, but then I didn't know how much pre-show was actually pre-showing, and
reasonable.
We'll just see what happens.
Yeah. I wonder, like, I'm curious. You being on a timer, like, what effect is that going to have on the show? We'll see. I guess
we're gonna be dead on the clock.
Yeah. While we're talking about products, we'd like to see similar to a 32-bit float podcast recorder. I have spent so much time looking to find a.
Are there not 32-bit podcast recorders?
I haven't found one.
I didn't even know you were looking.
Yeah. I would like to find. If maybe one of our listeners knows where I can get one of these, but
eBay.
I want a digital like timer thing. You press the button and it starts counting up. But I want one that has two displays, like one on each side, because then we could put it in the middle of this table between us, and I could press the start button when I press record, and then you and I would both be able to see the same time counting up. Those things are really hard to find. The only thing I've found that seems like it does anything similar to that is made for like a gym, and it's like $400, and I'm not paying $400 for a timer.
Daniel, the answer is you need to get like one of these bad boy like chess clocks.
That's not, but that doesn't solve the problem.
I know it's to the side,
yeah.
But I bet maybe they make one that is on both sides. But we could like hit the switch. That would be so much fun.
Can you imagine how quickly you would run through your allotted amount of time? We could give you 80% of the time and me 20% of the time, and you would still run out of your time like a third of the way through the podcast.
Maybe that's not how we use it. Maybe we use it based on topics. I don't know.
It'd be interesting.
This is a digital one. I am definitely off base right now.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like I look up dual-sided chess timers.
Believe me, I've looked for stuff like this, and I'm not saying. I mean, if you find one, it'd be great, but it's not. They're not in abundance.
There has to be something like this out there, though. It can't be. We have the only use case where one needs a dual display timer that shows it on both sides.
You would think, yeah, because. I'd be curious to see how this podcast changed if we had something like that, because I can see the time, how long we've been recording, because I'm sitting here with the recorder next to me. You can't. And I always kind of wonder like how much of a concept you have of how long we spent on topics and like how much more time we have left in the show.
I have no idea. Like sometimes I'll run a timer. Other times I'm just like, it feels like we've been going a while.
Would you say that you just podcast from the heart?
I'm feeling it. I'm just following it. Whenever I start getting tired, I'm like, it's probably been an hour.
Yeah. And you're usually right. It usually has been about an hour.
I start dragging out topics and like just try to like look for cues in your face.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You can tell if I start trying to like cut you off on things.
Yeah. What if the strategy here is you could just put a mirror behind you?
What if we needed like multiple mirrors?
Well, I can't read.
This is my theory. I've talked about this in the show before.
I can't read backwards.
I have talked about this in the show before, that my theory is that there are a lot of technical problems that can actually be solved with a complicated system of mirrors.
I mean, this is a camera podcast, and
true.
Leica would agree with you.
Yeah. It's a very good point.
It seems like that used to be how we solve things before software existed.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Software has replaced mirrors.
We've lost the art of mirroring.
Yep. I think you're right.
We have to go back to the old witching ways and use those giant mirrors to disappear things instead of camera tricks on TikTok.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're getting a little off topic.
I have two updates for you.
All right.
One is I had talked previously about a DNG workflow, and I had done some DNG conversions from Fujifilm RAW, which is .RAF. And I use the compressed Fujifilm RAW, not the lossless compressed, rather than the uncompressed, to save a little bit of space. And I noticed that sharpening in Lightroom on the RAF files feels a lot like I'm sharpening the grain structure rather than sharpening the image. And whenever I do the denoise conversion or upscale conversion stuff in Lightroom, I have a better experience with sharpening. Like, it feels like it's actually sharpening the things in the image, not just the noise patterns in the image. And so I was thinking, maybe this is some function of the fact that it is just a DNG file and it's a different type of raw file, and not so much the fact that it did these upscaling things to make the image cleaner.
Yeah.
And so I did some A/B comparisons where I took 4 different sample files in RAF and I used Adobe's DNG converter, which is supposedly a lossless raw conversion from .raf to DNG. So it's still a raw file technically. And I brought it into Lightroom. I did not lose access to any of the camera metadata, so I was still able to change the film simulations to match the camera that I shot it on. So that's a good thing.
It's good that it didn't lose anything.
Yep, and it still had all the lens profiles and everything, so it was treating it just the same. And I did a lot of apply a ton of sharpening, push the files around, move the exposure all the way up, all the way down, add contrast, do some denoising, and A/B compare the files, and they look basically the same regardless of if it was in DNG or RAF. And so I think that the demosaicing of whatever the data coming off the sensor was not impacted by the conversion from RAF to DNG, unlike whenever you do the AI noise reduction stuff in Lightroom. I think it's doing more than just converting the raw. It's like restructuring those bits in a certain way to make it different.
I see.
And so my conclusion was adding a DNG conversion to my raw workflow provides no benefit other than to make the files bigger.
Well, that's why you do experiments, I guess, to figure out whether things like that are the case. The only thing that still feels weird about it to me is if you do use the AI noise reduction thing, now you're suddenly ending up with this weird extra DNG file that you don't normally have. And so I guess to me, it feels like the one advantage to converting to DNG would just be consistency. Like everything would be a DNG. But that doesn't feel worth the trade-off of the time it would take to do these conversions and the larger file size.
It would help me find those files. I don't like having 2 versions of the file, but I always want to have the original. And if I was doing the AI denoise or upscaling and it saves it as a DNG file, I can easily find those because the extension is different in Lightroom.
Yeah,
so
true.
I think that makes it a little easier. Doing the noise reduction, like that AI noise reduction, or even like the upscaling, boy, can you make those images a lot better. Like I was editing one of the what was it? Our friend did that rodeo thing, and I shot some photos of some, not barrel racers. What's the word I'm looking for? Ropers. And it was, and so I was editing one of the pictures of one of the girls doing roping, and like cleaning that up and like sharpening, and I did the new adaptive color that Adobe added into Lightroom with it, and I was able to make that picture look pretty stinking awesome in my opinion. A lot more than the original edit pass. It looks so much cleaner and a lot better.
I felt like,
and I do think a lot of those like noise reduction tools and things that Adobe has been adding into Lightroom are significantly improving the amount of like post-processing you can do to your images.
Yeah, the AI does have some good potential in terms of cleaning up some of that stuff, and I feel a lot more positive about that side of things than I do about all the AI image generation stuff. We've talked a lot about that, but like another good example of this is Topaz Gigapixel AI is the software that kind of lets you upscale images, and you can get some pretty incredible results from that. Like sometimes it looks kind of like weirdly fake, and skin too smooth and things like that. But certain types of pictures that can really do a lot in terms of just like adding more detail, making something not look out of place. I know Resolve also has that super scale thing built in, and we've used that some in videos where, we had like a lot of video content, but then we also had some photos that the client had given us. And sometimes the photos you get are like, somebody shot this on their iPhone 8 that they're still using for some
Or
reason
like
or
some
whatever.
3-megapixel camera from
Yeah.
2001.
Yeah, and it's just like it looks so bad that it looks out of place compared to the rest of the video. And sometimes using one of those upscaling things, it's like you can make it look reasonable enough that it doesn't look jarring. You know, when
Yeah,
you see
like
it.
you just have to get it to a point where you have at least 2 megapixels tall and 3 megapixels wide to fit
Yeah.
into a 4K timeline. But doing a small upscale on it, it does help. It helps
Yeah.
helps a decent amount.
I guess what I mean is it's noticeably better than just going into Photoshop or whatever and like, you know, using a regular upscaling algorithm. So I think there's some exciting stuff happening there.
I don't think I'd heard of this Topaz thing. I'm gonna have to check that out. It
It's
sounds
pretty cool.
interesting.
Yeah.
My main complaint about all this stuff is that it's still not on my iPad version of Lightroom, and I just get really mad that there is some subset of features that are not available on Lightroom on the iPad, and I really need those programs to be the same.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we covered that quite a bit
I'm also
last week.
I'm
but
also
I
very
totally agree
angry
with
that I'm like 3 times faster editing on my computer than on my iPad.
you. Yeah, because you
But-
were trying. We talked last time about that whole like how are we going to handle these client workflow things, and you know I was kind of giving you a hard time because I was just going to do it on a computer, and I think you eventually used your computer for some of these photos, and you were kind of mad because you said you were like 3 times faster.
Well, yeah, like the whole thing, I was like, I really screwed up that first pass because I was like, I'm just going to do these on my iPad. And so I imported all the photos and then I selected all the photos and put them into an album. But when I did that, I did it before they had finished syncing. And so not all the photos ended up in the album. And so I edited half the photos and I thought I was done. And I'm like going to send, I'm like, all right, got it all uploaded. I'm about to send it out. And then I'm going to delete all these photos, archive these all out of Lightroom. I archived them all and there was still photos left. And I'm like, wait a second.
And when you say half, this was like a 700 photo set.
Yeah, I had like 300 more photos to cull and edit. Oh, dumb. And so I was like, I'm here. I'm on my computer. I'm just going to knock this out. And just familiarity with keyboard shortcuts and like being able to more fastly select and copy paste and apply things and like the A/B comparisons and all of that stuff. It's just everything is 1 or 2 more clicks, like touch points on the iPad. Like even like I'm going to apply this thing. I have to like click into the thing, click on the menus up here, click here, and then hit apply, or paste or whatever. Versus on the computer, I'm like Command A, Command V, or Command Shift V or whatever. And it's like boom, done. And it's those things all add up. It literally like at least 3 times faster to do it all on the computer, which is frustrating because whenever I'm on my computer, I feel like I'm in work mode, and I know this is work, but whatever. When I'm on my iPad, I'm just like cruising.
Yeah. But I think what you just said. Like, it's unfortunate that is the case, and it feels like a very artificial limitation. But I think what you just said is kind of the right way to approach it. Where if you're just kind of like, you know, relaxing, like, I think it would be fun to edit photos right now. To me, that feels like sit on the couch, use the iPad. Like, you're just kind of relaxing. It's enjoyable. But on the other hand, like if I'm doing a client thing and I've got to go through 700 photos, it's like, all right, I just need to like lock in and get this done. Like I need to crank these out.
Yeah.
To me, that's when I would be using the computer and like, I'm going to be able to get through these faster and I have more tools available. And it's just like, it just makes more sense in that situation. But
Sometimes
it's a shame you have to make that trade-off.
Sometimes I just want to lay down with my iPad and watch ET.
Yep.
And just work through photos.
Yep. Well, this is why most of my after 5 p.m. Work, like when I'm doing our stuff rather than my day job, even though I have like a really nice monitor and a nice desk setup and stuff, I'm almost always doing that sitting on the couch with my laptop because it's nice to get into a different environment.
Yeah, different posture, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, Danny, we got to keep this thing moving.
Yeah, we do. We haven't
even
gotten the main topic.
Look. This is
probably gonna be a long episode.
This is the Lumix S1R II super episode, and we don't have time for all of this preamble.
We don't have time, but unfortunately, we've already spent the time. So I think
it's true. My giant clock here says that we're almost done.
Yeah.
So
I think this episode's going to go into overtime.
Crud. Well, let me go ahead and knock one more.
Let's just talk about some more other topics.
Sorry.
All right,
Whoops.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I said that I was going to try to double stack teleconverters, and I did.
I think I saw you doing that. Like I looked over and you're standing next to this broadcast camera, just like fumbling with like all these things on the front of the lens. Like, what is Lucas doing?
Yeah, so I took a Canon EF 70-200 on a 1.4x teleconverter, and I mounted that to my Fringer FX adapter, and then I put that on a teleconverter, and I connected that to my XT5. And it was ungainly, and the camera didn't know what lens it was on. It was just reporting f0. So the communication from lens to teleconverter to adapter to teleconverter to camera really something was lost in translation. So it had no idea what lens was on there. And focusing was a little tough, and everything was starting to kind of fringe quite a bit. Like
as one would expect from a Fringer adapter.
It looked a little glowy, is all I'm saying. Like sometimes it's like, why is there an aura around this person, kind of thing that you get off some lenses.
Weird.
So it looked a little soft in that way. But I was able to focus and resolve. So
interesting.
Technically works, but I think that you run into quite a bit of diffraction problem and a light reduction problem. So maybe this is more of like a on a tripod outside with something not moving type solution if you like just really, really need that range.
Yeah. Interesting. At least you tried it.
Well, but imagine putting that 12, like that super, super expensive 1200 millimeter EF lens on a 2x EF teleconverter, and then adapting that to another 2x teleconverter onto an APS-C camera.
At that point, you're just using a telescope.
I mean, it would be like 2400, 4800 plus the crop factor at 1.5. You're shooting like almost 7,000 millimeters, Daniel.
Yeah, I can't imagine that working very well.
You would have to have so much light.
Yep.
You'd have to have like shooting at the sun.
On the light topic, I think we might have gotten something wrong on teleconverters with the number of stops you lose. Somebody commented on our YouTube video for that episode saying that a 2x teleconverter doubles the stops. They said a 4 turns into f8. I don't know if that's like, I haven't validated that, but
yeah, a 4 turns to 8.
But like, it's not plus 2 stops. Like that, they were saying it's not plus 2 stops; it doubles the stops.
But, well, I mean, it takes the f-stop and it multiplies it by 2, which kind of like 2.8 to 5.6 is 2 stops. 2.8, 4, 5.6. 4 to 8 is 2 stops. 4, no, it isn't. It's 3 stops, right? 4, 5.6, 7.1 would be 2 stops. Is that right?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I thought there was something between 5.6 and 8.
It's just 7.1. I don't think it goes to 8. Does it?
Maybe not.
All right. Someone's going to have to pull up an f-stop chart. Danny, we don't have time for this. We can talk about f-stop charts later. I do think there's a difference between times and multiple and add. So sure, that makes sense.
Yep.
We have to talk about the S1R Mark II.
Fair enough.
Okay. Do you want me to, do you want to like work through the spec stuff and then get to the talking points, or do you want to work through the talking points and then go through the spec stuff?
Oh man. I always want to imagine that people listening to this show like have, maybe, seen this news and want to hear what we have to say about it. I don't know if that's true or not though. Do we want to do some kind of like lightning run through of like the big parts of the camera and then talk about what we think about it?
Yeah, I think that maybe I'll hit some of the big features, and then I'm going to bounce around on these notes horribly, and you're not going to be able to keep up.
All right, sounds great.
Okay, so
just like a normal episode.
Yeah, nothing different. This is the finally long awaited. When did the original Lumix S1R come out?
Oh my gosh! Now you're asking questions we don't know the answer to. Is it going to be 2019?
I think it was before that. I think that I searched Sir S1R. It came out
the Lumix Sir.
That's the second one, you doofus. I don't know. It came out a long time ago. Yeah, like 2019, 2018, something like that. It's been like 6 years. So this is obviously the replacement. It is a higher megapixel. I think the original S1R was in the 30s, if I remember right.
I think that's right. By the way, reviews were posted around July of 2019. So
Okay.
The old S1R has been out for
Around 2019.
5.5 years.
Oh, actually, this is less. The original S1R was 47.3 megapixels, 35 millimeter.
Awkward.
So this dropped down to 44 megapixels, and it is not a stacked sensor.
Yeah.
So we'd been thinking, what is this going to be? What's it going to look like? Are they going to try to chase the stacked sensor trend, something like a Z8 type sensor? That 48 megapixel stacked sensor would have been really cool. Or are they going to basically make this the same as the Lumix SL3? That was a leading consideration.
Leica SL3.
Thank you, Leica SL3.
60 megapixel.
Yeah, 63 megapixels, basically the same sensor that was in the A7 IV. They didn't do either of these things.
A7R4.
Thank you. Yeah, boy, I'm all over the place. Doesn't matter. This is a 44 megapixel, not stacked CMOS sensor, and all signs point to this being essentially the same sensor that's in the Ronin 4D.
Yeah. Same sensor, not same processing pipeline.
Right, same sensor, not same processing pipeline. So it's interesting in that by not going stacked, stacked sensors have a hit on the total amount of range that you can get out of it in photo. Like just your raw photo dynamic range capability is just going to be a little worse on a stacked sensor right now, unless you're shooting with like an A1 Mark II. That one's pretty competitive, but even still, like you're losing a little bit, but you're gaining a lot out of speed and being able to read more data off that sensor faster. And in general, it seems like Canon, Nikon, Sony, Fuji have kind of agreed that that is the right choice, unless you're trying to save money because the stacked sensors are expensive.
Yeah.
And so it seems like what Lumix has done here is they've kind of settled on something that's not as high res, like as an A7R5 or an A7R4 or an SL3. And they're like, okay, let's drop the resolution a little bit and then not go stacked. And that will let us have a better quality image off of the sensor. And we'll have maybe a little bit better dynamic range. And then also it's going to allow us to save money because this thing's coming in at $3,300.
Yeah. Honestly, it kind of feels to me like that sensor choice was maybe not completely, but largely budget related, because I was kind of excited when I had first seen the rumors that it was going to use a 44 megapixel sensor instead of that 60 megapixel sensor from the SL3, because I was thinking one of the reasons to use lower megapixels is because the video performance could be a little bit better, because you have like a 60 megapixel sensor, it's hard to read it off fast enough to get like an uncropped video at a reasonable frame rate. And that was kind of what I was hoping they were doing with this. It's based on some of the test results we've seen, it seems like they did get some of those results, but like there's some pretty big costs in terms of things like rolling shutter with the sensor. I mean, just the fact that it's not stacked makes it, potentially not as good at video as something like the Z8. Overall, it seems like you're not getting the same resolution that you get on something like an A7R5, and you're even a little bit lower, I guess, than like a Z8. And you're also not getting the stacked benefits. So it feels to me like one of their big advantages here is just the price.
Yeah, and that price is pretty good at $3,300. It's coming in lower than essentially everything else that's competition, unless this holds true. I found on Walmart.com, which is where I buy all my cameras.
Absolutely.
A deal for an A7R5 at $2,800.
Wow. I wonder are they expecting the A7R6 soon? Is that
That is quite a deal. At a glance, it has 1 megapixel. That's wrong. Anyways, wow, geez. Maybe buy an A7R5 from Walmart instead of this camera. Not really. But normally your A7R5 is like it's a $3,900 camera that's on sale for like $3,500 right now. Your Canon is kind of in the same boat where an R5 Mark II, I think, is like $3,800, but right now it's like $36,000 maybe. Is that right?
Somewhere in that range. I thought the nominal price of the R5 II was like $4,200.
Sorry, you're right. An R5 Mark II is $4,300, and that one's not on sale. Yeah. So that's significantly more.
The Z8's like $3,600, right?
Right, and generally, like, it's been on sale. It's more expensive than that, but like if you go to B&H right now, you're looking at $3,600 for an R5 Mark II from Sony or a Z8 from Nikon, and then the Canon equivalent to this high megapixel type pro camera would be the R5 at 4,300, which is $1,000 more. I think, the R5 Mark II, the A7 R5 and the Z8 are both like 2 years old. I think they're still highly competitive against this that Lumix just released. But even still, if you're like, okay, well, if you're comparing to something that came out last year, then maybe you're comparing an R5 to the Lumix, because we're probably going to get an A7R6 this year or early next year, and then that will be a more legit comparison. Yeah. We're kind of like in a weird refresh cycle. It feels like Lumix coming in at the price point they did is like, this is a budget price. This is the new price. When this goes on sale, it's going to be less than $3,000.
I mean, I also feel like in some of the spec ways, this doesn't quite match up with something like an R5 II and or an A7 R5, like the megapixel count. It's lower megapixels than the A7 R5. And I've seen some people online talking about the S1R II and saying, well, you're comparing it against the R5 II, but that camera is so much more expensive, and it kind of like it makes you ask the question: is this a competitively priced camera that is in the same class as those cameras, or is this kind of a different, like they're hitting into a lower bracket where it's like this is a more expensive $2,500 camera? Like, this is like a little, like it's like between an R6 and an R5 II. So I'm not sure whether it's intended to compete against those things. Like, how much was budget factoring into that? Or is this is the camera that they made and that was the price they felt they could hit? I don't know.
My impression is that Lumix is trying to expand their market here, and they know that in order to legitimately pull market away from Sony and Canon, they're going to have to beat them on price. And so they're making a certain set of trade-offs. I'm expecting that this is their high-resolution still camera, while also still like good at video. And like they're finding that balance of Lumix means video to a lot of people. So how do we provide a high-resolution still camera that is lower in price but also has really good video features? And then this is what you get. Yeah. And I think that similar to the R5 and the R1 from Canon being this sports version and then high-resolution version, I'm expecting that we will get an S1H Mark II, as we've been saying on this podcast for the last 3 years. And I think that camera will be more expensive, lower megapixel, probably in the 6K. Maybe it'll be 8K, maybe it'll be 8K stacked, maybe it'll be 6K, but it'll be lower megapixel with better burst rates. Yeah. And so that will be your fast photography and your video camera coming, compared to this one. And sure, it'll be more, but I think that's how they tackle this market. And they let this one be this cheaper option.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the fact that it has the R in the name, I think that's kind of one of the most interesting things to consider is why was this not just an S1 Mark II? And the fact that it has the R in the name makes me think, because it's to back up. I wondered if they, when they came out with the S5, they had the S5 II and the S5 IIX, and it was kind of like this good all around camera, and the X added a couple of video features that were not in the regular. And I wondered if they were going to kind of consolidate their lines and have an S1 Mark II and then maybe an S1 Mark IIX that, kind of a similar pattern. But the fact that they've released this as an S1R Mark II makes me think they are kind of targeting that market where this is 75% photo, 25% video. Like, they're obviously pushing the video features, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, but it seems like it's more oriented on the photo side, and they're kind of prioritizing that dynamic range, with the non-stack sensor. And then, like you said, they are hitting a really competitive price here where it's, if you're a photo guy and you're wanting to, buy the flagship camera, you can do that for cheaper with Lumix than you can with Canon or Nikon or Sony.
I think that the S1R Mark II is extremely compelling. When I saw it come out, I saw it wasn't stacked. It went in 44 megapixel, and I was kind of disappointed. And then I watched Gerald's video, and then I was extra disappointed. And then I watched all the other videos and read all the other reviews, and then I was like, oh, well, actually, this is pretty stinking good. Yeah. And now I'm like, I still don't know how to feel. I'm kind of like all over the place on this. And part of me is like, is this the perfect camera? And then another part of me is like, sure seems really compromised.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough. There's some interesting features that we do need to run through here. I think we're getting a little stuck on the positioning in the market, but I also think the positioning in the market is really interesting because, like you said, this is the S1R. S1R Mark II, if you go back to their original line, which I have trouble imagining Panasonic keeping the same amount of cameras. It seems like they've been trying to cut back on like the number of lines that they've run over time. Like they dropped most of their Micro Four Thirds stuff other than the G9 and the GH line. And it seemed like, they released the S5 Mark II and the S5 S5 Mark II and S5 Mark II X at a nice, $1,800 price point. They know that sub $2,000 for a full frame camera is really, really appealing for a lot of people. And it makes you wonder, okay, well, what else do they find room for above that if that's kind of the bulk of their market?
Yeah.
And this coming in at $3,300, I can see the S1H Mark II being more expensive. Maybe that's a $4,000 camera, $3,800 camera, $3,500, it's more expensive. Is there room for a $2,500 camera in the middle that's the S1 Mark II?
Yeah.
Or do you think that just drops off and there is no S1 Mark II?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think there's some people that would buy it, and the question is just, are there many that would buy it? And I don't know. I mean, because I have a hard time kind of like writing out a feature set that would make sense for that camera. I
don't know. I don't know what it would be.
Yeah.
If the S1R Mark II is, the 44 megapixel high resolution, and the S5 is already 24 not stacked, but a good photo camera still, like what would the S1 be? Maybe like something in the middle, 30 megapixels. It wouldn't be stacked. It would have to be 25. I don't know what the S1 would be that wouldn't, where you can kind of like land in the middle. Maybe it has better video features than the R Mark II, but offers higher resolution and less compromise than the S5 Mark II. Because S5 Mark II is amazing, but you're still shooting cropped 4K 60, and you're still losing out on like some of those modes are 420 instead of 422, and you're just really limited on the age of that sensor, even though it's still an incredible camera. And so it would be cool to see like an S1 that has a newer sensor that's in the 32 to 24 megapixel range, where you're not seeing a lot of those compromises. Something very much like what we saw at Canon with the R6, which is like the R6 Mark II. It's not a stacked sensor, but they can shoot full frame 4K 60. And it's, a pretty well performing sensor, and it kind of feels like a good compromise. So maybe like there's still room in the middle, but hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so
yeah, let's get into some of these other features.
Yeah, let me kind of
hear more about it.
Talk through about the sensor, hit on a few things, just bullet point. I just reached over, and now I'm trying to scroll on my laptop with my thumb.
Yeah, it's just
because I'm normally used to using
those oils all over the screen.
Used to using my iPad for podcasting. This doesn't do anything, Daniel.
Yeah, you're just sitting there rubbing.
Why is the touchscreen not working? This is the first time I've ever done that. It's horrible. Oh boy, I'm really disappointed with myself right now. Anyway, low end ISO is 80. It goes up to not 51 200. It's like 25 600, and then you can extend it to 102 400. Okay. So very common. Somewhere below 80. Some cameras go down to 40. This one's 80, up to 102 400 for the ISO sensitivity, but that is 2 stops into extended ISO. Okay. So fine, decent. It is dual native ISO. It's not dual gain, so it's not like the GH7 where you have the dual gain sensor, even though they are doing the extended dynamic range. So on the GH7, you can do the DRE, which is dynamic range extension mode, and it will do, if I'm understanding this correctly, it'll take the input from both, feed 2 gains into the sensor, and then take the input at both gains and then combine the images to give you a higher dynamic range image. This is doing DRE, but this is not a dual gain sensor, it's dual native ISO. So it's using whatever magic to give you roughly a stop on the top end. In video testing from Gerald, he was showing like a half a stop, but call it like a stop at most at the top end with DRE enabled. And the base ISOs on this are 400 and 2000 ISO with DRE on, and then it drops to 200 and 100 with DRE off. Okay. And so you can sacrifice a stop on the very top end of your dynamic range, which is probably not really that much of a sacrifice unless you have a really, really wide situation you're shooting. and you can get a nice low ISO at 200 for that base.
It is nice having a low base ISO.
Yeah, it really helps with the noise, and we see that a lot in the video stuff. But that's kind of like the sensor that we're working with. Not stacked, blah, blah, blah. There is IBIS, 8 stops. Really good because it's a Lumix, and they have that big image circle to work with. So that's kind of like the short jiffy on what we're looking at as far as what this sensor can do. It's about 7,800 by 6,000 something pixels or whatever, so it's roughly 8K.
Well, and the camera can shoot 8K.
Yeah, the camera can shoot 8K. 8K is UHD.
Yeah.
Well, the 8K. Like 8K is not really 8K. Like it's not like DCI 8K because you're not really getting 8,000 pixels.
Yeah.
But roughly 8K. No, you are getting 8,000. It'll do 8128 by 4288.
Okay.
For some reason, I thought that the 7680 was the width resolution, but I guess that's wrong. Anyway, that's the rough rundown on the sensor itself. As far as like a few interesting features, you're getting CF Express. You didn't have that on the S5 Mark II. The EVF is 5.76 million dots. That's pretty good. It's not like your Sony A7R V is like what, 9 million dots or something.
Yeah, I think 9 million is about the highest you get right now, and it's not surprising at this price point that they have a lower.
Well, most if it's not that, like most cameras are in this 5.6 million dot range. The Z8, for instance, is 3 million dots. It's actually like the one step down. So this is kind of as good as you get without going, top of the spec sheet Sony level. I don't even think the R5 Mark II is beyond 5.76. So it's a good EVF. It's probably OLED. I don't remember. It has the variable angle tilty screen, which is
like the best type of tilty screen you can get now, I feel like.
And it seems like they've improved it as well to make it a little more rugged. But it's got the tilty function, which team tilty screen, but it also has the flippy function.
Yep.
And Panasonic's doing it, Sony's doing it. We need everyone else to do it too.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I would ideally like to have on my next camera.
Yeah, for sure. That's a huge win there. They added a tally lamp. Body style is really similar to the S5 Mark II.
That's kind of an interesting point because the S1 cameras, like the S1H, for example, and the regular S1 and S1R, like that whole line had a significantly larger body than the S5. And now it's nearly the same size as the S5.
Yeah, which is cool. It's also lighter. I think it's like 250 grams lighter than the outgoing S1R.
It's quite a bit.
Which is great. And it has the fan, like the innovative fan thing that they did with the S5 where it pulls in through like the viewfinder and then out the side or whatever. This has a fan also, which is great, right? It enables some more video features, maybe longer video record times, but not really based upon some testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tally lamp, other things kind of worth noting about the body. They took the SNQ and the video mode off of the PSAM dial and they put that onto a switch. So
Very
you have
happy with that.
Yeah, so you have a photo, video, SNQ switch to like choose your modes, and then they added 2 more custom modes. That's something that I thought was amazing that I wanted more cameras to do whenever I got my XH2S. On the XH2S, I either C1 through C7 on your dial, and I have those set to, you can set those to video or photo mode, so there is no like video photo switch on the Fujifilm XH2S. It is, I just have like C1 through C4 on my video modes, and then C5, 6, and 7 on my photo modes, and like, I love it.
I do like this approach better because on the Fuji, I like the functionality once I configure it, but it's a little annoying that for each of the C modes, you have to kind of go in the menus and say, I want this to be a photo mode or I want this to be a video mode. And on this, I feel like it's way more clear that I flip this one physical switch on the camera. Like, this is ironic, right? I'm talking about happy about physical things on a non-Fuji camera, but it's like, I flip the physical switch, and then now I know that those custom modes are associated with that camera mode.
Yeah,
that
and
makes more sense to me.
So this is something that the Canon R5C did, where they had this like when you flipped it into video mode, it used the video menus and all this sort of stuff, and you flipped it into photo mode, and it was photo. This isn't that extreme, but when you put it in video mode, all of your buttons on the camera. And all of the custom modes and everything are for that mode. And so you can have 5 different custom modes for your video stuff. You can set all your, this one, I want this to be my crop button and this to be my focus check. And like you can set all those custom buttons. You flip it into photo mode and they can be something totally different.
Yeah.
And all those custom modes can be different. And so you effectively have 10 custom modes. And I am all about custom mode. Like if the Sony cameras only having C1 through C3, I always find a bit restraining.
Yeah.
I want more options. This having 5 is amazing because you can set so you can set all 5 of them in your photos to different like Lumix LUT profiles, and those can be like your film simulations. And then you can, in video mode, you can have your 8K and your 4K 60 and your 4K 24, and you can have all those set. It's perfect. Yeah. This is the way. That's it. This is the way.
Yep. This is the way.
Yeah. No notes. Nailed it. Oh, but also like I love the way that Lumix does their body design, particularly in that the ISO white balance buttons are in a row left to right instead of front to back, right behind the shutter button. And when you're holding like a camera with like a forward angled shutter button, being able to just come back with your index finger and then have, right where you can kind of, you extend your finger and you can hit all 3 buttons.
Yep.
You're not having to like tilt your hand further and further back into some I hate that about my camera.
It seems like they put
this camera amazing.
They put a lot of thought into the design. Like they said they moved the thumb wheel, kind of like recessed it a little bit so that you wouldn't accidentally bump it, which I do appreciate that because that's a problem I've had sometimes on other cameras.
The Lumixes in particular, that's been weird. The rear thumb wheel on the Lumixes, and most cameras, it's a recessed kind of wheel within the back of the camera. On this, it looks like a dial sitting on top of the camera that you move with your thumb. And on the S5, it was so easy to brush that thing and move it with your thumb.
Yep.
Here, like you said, they moved it forward a little bit, and now it's less easy to accidentally turn.
Yeah.
I want them to add a lock to that button. That would be cool.
That would be nice.
They did add a lock to the other two. So.
Yeah, the mode dials basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, exactly. So I think those are maybe like the main big updates as far as kind of body stuff that are worth talking about.
I can't remember if they had this on the old one, but they did also, I think, add a lock switch for the settings. Like there's a switch. Like I'm not talking about locking wheels, but there's like a switch on the camera that you can lock your settings, which is I think that's a good pro feature.
Yeah, I think that what it is like you can choose to lock certain settings when you're recording. And you can say like when I'm recording, don't let me change the shutter speed or something.
Well, but I mean, there's a switch. Like the camera has a physical button for that.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool. I like that.
And they're not the first ones to do it, but I think that's a good pro feature. Of like I know how I want this set, and then temporarily, I want to like not be able to change the settings.
Yeah. Other things I guess to point out on the body, they took away the flash sync socket. It has all the things that you need as far as input. They have USB-C, full HDMI, headphone and mic. And it has like the multifunction hot shoe that does the 32-bit audio that we saw on the GH7. So it's like all those input things that you would need.
Yeah.
And then the carbon fiber shutter is you can now choose to have it stay closed when you take the lens off.
I want every camera to have that. I remember my EOS R back when I had that was one of the first cameras we really saw do that. And it was such a nice feature back then. And I still just hate when I'm changing lenses and trying to like swap it as quickly as possible, limit how much dust can get in there. And this feels like an obvious feature that every brand needs to offer.
I got into the situation where I had dust on my XH2S sensor, which ultimately, like, it's going to happen, right? We've been shooting all kinds of stuff with that camera for 2 years. And it got to the point where like I couldn't get it off. I ran the clean function. I used my little blowy jet thing, like the little, what do you call those things? Like
rocket blower.
Rocket blower, sure. Except mine's not a rocket. It's not cool like that.
Yeah, that's like a Kleenex situation. It's always a rocket blower.
Got it. Well, so like I did all the things and I could not get the dust off. And we had a shoot coming up, and I was like, I don't want to like take it somewhere. I'm gonna do it. I've gone through the sensor cleaning process before with my GX7 because
that was a little unsuccessful though.
Yeah, I just totally ruined that sensor from driving. If it's not weather sealed, don't bring your camera on a Jeep Expedition on the beach.
Yeah, bad idea.
Yep, just not. Anyways, boy, I live and learn, right? Anyways, I bought the sensor cleaning, and like the day before the shoot, I just did it. And I was like, sure hope this doesn't go wrong, and I don't ruin my camera the day before our shoot. But also, like, I don't want to shoot with a dirty sensor.
So how does that? Give us the quick rundown. How does that work? How do you do that?
So I bought the cleaning kit, and you get the swab that's sized for your sensor. So like, it is exactly as tall as your sensor. So I bought the Super 35 APS-C ones. You get an alcohol-ish based solution, and like the sensor has glass on it. It's not like you're touching the sensor. The sensor has a cover on top of it, and like you could reach in there and like touch it. You just like don't want to damage it because it is really sensitive. Anyways, you put like a few drops onto the swab. Like you take the swab out of the plastic. Sorry, 2 steps back. Blow all the dust off of it. Get as much dirt off of it as you can because you want to scrape the sensor with the dust. Because you absolutely could do that. Mm-hmm. And then you like 1 or 2 drops of the solution onto the swab, and then you 1 swipe left to right onto the sensor, and then tilting it the other way, you go backwards. And so you swipe one way, swipe the other way, and that's it. That swab is done. You only do 1 pass on each side, and then you check it to see if the dust is gone, and if not, whole new swab, do it again. Mm-hmm. And that's the concept. Don't push too hard, don't push too light.
Yeah, how'd it work?
I got it off in 2 passes.
Nice.
I only used 1 swab, and it worked out just fine. Nice. And the image is clean. So it was very stressful, but I did it.
Yep. Good to know.
Anyway,
it's definitely something I haven't wanted to need to do.
Yeah, it's a little stressful. Mm-hmm. So, but if my shutter closed, maybe I would never have to do it.
Yeah, maybe not.
Because I change lens all the time in bad situations.
It's true.
Anyway, okay, let's so that's kind of like the rundown on some of the body and the specs, other things that are maybe important. We do need to talk about some of like this photo stuff as far as its features. Maybe like we loop back to that. I do want to kind of get into some of these topics, and then maybe we can loop back. As far as video, some things that we're probably going to mention are like the new Cine-like A2 profile, and it can shoot 8K up to 30 frames per second, and 4K up to 120 with no crop, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was maybe the meaningful part of the video specs is, you know,
ProRes RAW internal.
You do get up to 8K. Has some open gate modes. Oddly, it's 6.4K at release, which is some kind of like oversample type thing. But they're planning to add 8.1K in a firmware update.
Right.
But the thing that I think a lot of people have been mentioning as a positive is that a lot of the modes are full sensor width. So like the 4K 60, and I thought the 4K 120. I hope that's right.
I think, and by full sensor width, we mean a 1.1 crop.
Is that what it is?
Generally, almost across the board, it's 8K on the sensor. So like it's an 8.1K sensor, and nearly all the video modes that are 16:9 are some subsampling or full sampling of the 7680 by 4320 image portion, which is what you would want. Is like, here's a sensor, here's a 1-to-1 image, and then we're going to work off of that like resolution.
Right.
But like, so whenever they ultimately release the 8128 by 4288, like full deal, like 8K, that'll be like no crop. But they're working within, here's the resolution off the sensor. And so I have no problem with that. But some people like who get a little caught up on crop factors are probably a little annoyed by the fact that it's 1.1 kind of across the board. Some of them are like a little less, a little more. Yeah. I don't really find that to be an issue. That's just like a function of how, like, you're shooting video on a photo camera. You're just going to have to deal with that.
It does look like 4K 120 has a slightly more of a crop. It's like a 1.17.
Okay.
But still like pretty minor. And that's kind of meaningful because it's annoying if you have I have an 85 and I know what that looks like. And then, suddenly I'm shooting in 4K 60 and it crops way in. And now that lens is like a totally different look.
Right.
So that they were proud. So they seemed proud of that feature too, and so that's kind of why I thought it's worth mentioning. It's like that's a key thing that they did.
Yeah, I think so. So that's kind of like the rough. I do want to get into the weeds on that stuff and some of those features, but I do want to run through some of this topic list that I have here.
Okay.
And the first is mostly related to poor Mr. Undone and the rolling shutter testing fiasco.
I think he's gotten a lot of flack from that video. Just from what I've seen from him since then, it seems I haven't really read the comments on the video, but it seems like a lot of people have been upset about that.
It's tough because like he started out positive on the camera and then had just between the dynamic range testing and the rolling shutter testing, it was like, boy, this thing didn't really under like test conditions didn't really produce.
Yeah,
well, and he's just
overheating,
and the overheating, yeah. And like he's just reporting results, and the results do not look favorable, and really make the camera look bad. And everyone's like, "You're wrong," and they're mad at him.
Yeah, the rolling shutter was I was kind of shocked at how bad it was.
And I watched like Stallman's video. I watched Petapixel. I think I watched like one more. I've looked at like footage coming off this and B-roll, and like you can't tell. Like if you're like really like moving the camera up and down, you're gonna get some jelly. If you're doing a lot of whip pans, it's gonna be super, super obvious. But I think that from like most general B-roll stuff, this rolling shutter thing is a non-issue. And I kind of have come full circle on that, because when I watched Gerald's video, I was like, this camera is unusable and Daniel shouldn't buy it. And now I'm like, maybe this is the right camera for Daniel.
Oh man,
this
is gonna prove to be an interesting conversation today,
so I've come like full circle on this thing.
Yeah.
But do you mind if I just like jump into the results here and
Let's
like
do
talk?
it.
Okay, so Gerald tested in a few different modes, and like I like waiting to see CineD's database testing, because like CineD does the same thing, and like Petapixel did some of it, but like they quote them in like 1/seconds, like 1/50, 1/35, and I can't do that math.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means. I guess I could like do 1/50 and then like convert it to milliseconds. That sounds too hard. Anyways,
we're honestly used to the way Gerald and CineD report the results, and so I feel like the milliseconds makes it much easier for us to compare across cameras.
For sure. And so like whenever CineD does it and kind of reports it to their database, which will be like probably in a month or so, we'll be able to kind of like see what their testing stuff looks like, and they may do more modes. But if you're shooting in the open gate so DR on, DR off, this is important. That's the dynamic range extension mode, which is supposed to give you an extra stop on the high end. That impacts read speed substantially. And so if you're shooting in any of the oversample modes or the full 8K mode, so that's like 5.9K open gate, the 4K oversample from 8K, the 6K oversample from 8K, or just straight up 8K, any of those modes. Basically anything that's 30 frames per second is going to be oversampled, which is awesome. Full sensor size, oversampled from 8K, great, love it. With DR on, that's 37 milliseconds.
Yeah, like maybe the worst rolling shutter number I've ever seen reported.
Aggressively slow.
Yeah.
Like the camera that I love the most, which is my Fujifilm X-H2S, like 6 milliseconds.
Yeah.
Amazing. And like some of the modes, like you might be able to push up to 15, but if you're in the teens, 15, 17, you can do some fast motion. You can mostly get away with it. It's basically fine. If you're sub 10, if you're in the single digits millisecond rolling shutter, pretty imperceptible. And like you can get away with electronic shutter photo shooting, and like you're pretty good. Most of your Sony cameras, like your A7 5s, your A7 4s, are 23 to 25 milliseconds. And if you like whip pan slowly, boy, you can see it.
Yeah.
But most of the time you can basically just like get by. So 37 is awful.
Yeah.
It's like unusable awful.
I mean, I'm like for certain types of things. If what you're filming is a static interview shot, I don't think you'd notice.
You're absolutely correct. And well, that's the thing. It's like if it's just kind of normal static background, some motion, and you're not like moving the camera up and down or left and right significantly, it's actually probably fine.
Yeah.
Which is maybe like where you use it. You can turn the DR off, and then that drops from 37 to 23.
No, it's much, yeah. So
And-
the one setting makes it much better.
Yeah, and now you're in like, Sony territory, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like there's modes where you have the option to like go into line skips or whatever, but if you do get into like the 4K 60 or the 4K 20 and you are dealing with line skips with DR off, now you're getting into like 15 milliseconds for 4K 60 and 8 milliseconds for 4K 120.
Which those numbers are much better. It's not gonna be quite as sharp because of the line skipping.
Yeah, and I don't have like the camera in front of me, and I don't know like all the options that are in those menus. But if you have an option, like if there's an option to shoot 4K 24 line skipped, and you could trade sharpness for rolling shutter and get like less than 10 millisecond rolling shutter, that's great if that option exists.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I don't think it does, but
They could add stuff
I
like
think
that.
I think kind of where I land on this is like, just give me the option.
Yeah.
If I know that I need the most dynamic range possible, the high resolution possible, I'll sacrifice up to 37 milliseconds of rolling shutter. But if I know I need the motion, like let me shoot line skipped, which 4K 120, like that's when you're going to capture that fast motion. 8 milliseconds is going to get it perfect.
It's an interesting point because like if I think about the situations I use a camera, doing a static interview shot, that's where like the rolling shutter doesn't matter. Like you can really get that nice quality. But then if there's a way that you can trade off those settings and say, now I'm going to be shooting a bunch of kids running around playing a game, there's a lot of motion, like I'll sacrifice a little bit on the dynamic range and the sharpness, but get that performance. Like, I think it's fine to have those trade-offs as long as it's clear to you as the user, like what you're trading off and being able to make those decisions.
Yeah, and it's unclear to me if you're able to make those trade-offs in, like, if you're shooting 4K 16:9, are you able to choose oversampled or line skipped?
Yeah.
I don't know if, like, most cameras will say like 4K HQ versus 4K not HQ.
Oh, and one issue with Panasonic is that they often kind of, I don't want to say dumb down because I actually kind of prefer this most of the time, but they give you reasonable presets for those things, like versus Fuji, where Fuji, it feels like you can change every setting, like, and I've complained about that before. That's just like too much. So I don't know if they give you that choice or not.
I would hope that they will add it if they don't, because being able to choose the line skip option would be pretty good for this camera because of the issue, like not issue, but the trade-off with the rolling shutter. Now, as far as like DR on, DR off, it feels like you're taking a pretty big hit to get that extra stop on the top end. And it seems like in video, it's not really that useful. And so on the subject of dynamic range testing, Gerald did like DR off, DR on. He did, 8K in an 8K timeline. Then he did 8K in a 4K timeline where he did the oversampling in post. And then he did 4K oversampled out of camera. And essentially what he came to was, if you're doing 4K oversampled in camera, it produces roughly the same dynamic range as the downsampling in your NLE, just shooting an 8K and then putting it in a 4K timeline. And the result is essentially like almost even across the board, which is good. And that's like 3.6 stops with DR. 13.6 stops with DR on, and like 13.2 with DR off, give or take a little bit depending upon like exactly the mode. And so that is relatively competitive. Most of your mirrorless type kind of consumer level cameras are going to give you roughly 14 stops. It's, you're pulling 12 to 14 bits off the sensor depending upon your camera. Like, this is totally expected. It's not as good as something like a Fujifilm X-H2S, which is doing like 15 stops because, but anyway, like it's fine. And then as far as like your clean stops, depending upon like your noise reduction and how much you do in post, you're going to get somewhere around 12 to 13, call it like 12 and a half stops of dynamic range that are clean.
These numbers seem fine, but it's not pushing the technology forward.
No, and it's interesting in that like this is a full frame camera that is not stacked. It should have very good dynamic range, and it's basically just even with the market. It's better than something like a Z6 Mark III with its partially stacked sensor, but it's not really any better or any worse than a Z8 or an R5 Mark II in video.
Yeah. I mean, this is why, kind of why I was saying earlier that it feels like their reason for picking the sensor was, maybe partially for the price, because it doesn't seem like they really got too many advantages out of picking this over a different sensor.
Right. But it also feels like a good balance as far as features versus cost. Like, you're not losing too much either. Whereas if they tried to cram that 63 megapixel sensor in here, all these numbers would be way worse. And you would lose a lot of features and have more crop modes.
Yeah.
So I think that like my takeaway from Daryl's dynamic range testing was the DR boost mode in video kind of doesn't really matter unless you just absolutely need that extra half to one stop on the top end, which sometimes you do. Sometimes like getting that roll off is really, really nice.
If you're trying to shoot something where you've got like a sky in it, I can see it mattering.
Yeah, it may matter. And I have a picture in here, which I guess we'll link to. I think I got this out of the Petapixel review, so we'll make sure to link that review. But they had a photo in their stuff where they showed the histogram with like some boats on it. And you can see in not the histogram, but the lumograph. And you can see in the lumograph that like, oh yeah, there's the bump of the sky where you're getting that extra stop to half stop.
Yeah.
Versus like it being flat with it turned off.
The shot they're showing there is kind of what I had in mind of like, this is where I could see that mattering.
Yeah. And so like, it's cool to have an option, but it seems like for most video stuff that you're going to shoot that is maybe like indoors or isn't like super, super wide range, just leave the DRE off and have a good rolling shutter,
Yeah.
and like just shooting the oversampled 4K 24 or 30 with DRE off,
Yeah.
and it's going to be as good, if not better, than like an A7 V.
Mm-hmm. You know, I always appreciate Gerald's reviews, and he does testing that a lot of other people don't do. And, you know, it's nice to have like quantitative numbers to compare these things that, you know, are like the real world test, not what the marketing says in terms of like dynamic range and all that. But I think some of like what we're seeing in this conversation, and maybe like the contrast between his review and some of the other reviews, is that those lab tests don't always tell the full story of like what is it going to be like to use this camera. And I think you're making a good point that some of these things, like when you first look at it, you're like, well, man, like the rolling shutter is really bad in 8K, and it gets better if you turn DRE off. But like, why would I want to turn that off? Like, I'm losing performance. And when you look at the numbers, like that's kind of all you see. But if you start thinking about, well, how would you actually use this camera? It doesn't seem quite as bad, because like you said, I think in a lot of cases you could get by without the DRE and not really maybe even notice. And then that trade-off on the rolling shutter where, you know, do you want the maximum sharpness and quality versus fast motion, like also kind of makes sense. You know, I think that the way people typically use cameras, you may not really notice those things as much.
Yeah, so I think this is probably a good point for me to make my case for why I think this is the right camera for you. Which is, like, I watched the whole, like, DR stuff and blah, 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 and, like, Gerald video, and I'm like, man, this camera is too compromised in video. Mm-hmm. But then, like, I watched all the sample footages from, like, the whole Petapix review and, like, Salman's video and, like, stuff online from all the reviews and everything, and, like, you're getting like full vlog, you're getting all the Lumix profiles, you're getting all of those video features, which they've added like even more video features like false color and like tethering, and you can plug your iPhone into the USB-C port and use it as a monitor. And like they improved the autofocus, like they've added even more video features on top of what the S5 Mark II is doing. Added the tally lamp, added CF Express, and like so the video like feature package is even more robust. And it's the best out of any like hybrid mirrorless camera. Lumix's video feature package is the best. Mm-hmm. And so like you're getting that, and you're not really sacrificing that much. You're able to shoot all the way up to 8K with basically no crop. You can get 4K 120 out of this with like an APS-C crop. You can get uncropped 4K 60. Like it has all of those features in it. And sure, like maybe you're not getting the best out of the best out of the best rolling shutter performance, but that's because like you're saving a ton of money on not having like the most expensive camera.
Well, but I think this is an important point too. Even if you took the money out of the equation, like let's say, all right, like I don't care, I'll spend $5,000 on a camera. You know, anything is available. I still feel like there are things that Panasonic offers that no one else offers. Like you just said, they have the best video features on these hybrid mirrorless cameras. Some of these things, like it doesn't matter how much you give, you know, Canon or Sony. You don't get those things until you go up to like a cinema grade, like you know, C80, FX6, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I think that like the capabilities that you get, like the real world footage you're looking at, is like. It's better than what the specs are trying, like the testing shows, and like
better than what like Gerald's.
Yeah, like I'm not seeing a lot of sample footage where it's like here's a boat and the boat is like skewed to heck, right? It looks good, and like there's movement in the video, and it just looks good, and so I think that like this is highly capable, and like it's not an S1H Mark II, which is we both know what Daniel really wants, but I think that like. With the 32-bit audio and the Cinelike A2, like all of the features that it does come with is like it's really good and really compelling. And I think that like when I first looked at this camera, I was like, the battery life isn't as good as it could be. It doesn't have really long record modes, and it's like overheating in a standard room conditions, which is kind of a huge problem. And like everything's a 1.1 crop, and like the rolling shutter stinks. But like now when you take a step back away from just those testing things and you look at the footage coming off of it and the like value to feature, it's hard to beat.
Yeah. Let's talk about the overheating for just a second. So I want to make sure we don't lose that thread. So yeah, that was one thing that really stood out to me about Gerald's results. He always does these overheating tests, and what stuck out to me is that he was getting poor performance with the open gate modes.
Right.
And I think about like, what is one of the main things I do with video with a camera? It's us shooting.
Open gate on a tripod.
It's open gate on a tripod, us shooting these videos. The one we did the other day, the recording was about 40 minutes or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sure hate to be in that situation and be worried about my camera overheating.
Yeah. Something I never worry about when we're shooting with those Fujis is like,
yeah.
I mean, that battery is going to be able to shoot in 4K for an hour and a half. And if I need to plug in externally, I will. And like, it just doesn't overheat.
Yeah. And it did seem like after Gerald's kind of initial thing, he did some more testing, and it seemed like, for one thing, if you set the fan curve on, so you can change the fan curve on the camera.
Super cool.
And if you turn that up, like not even to the max, like if you set it on normal instead of auto, it seemed like that helped a lot. So that feels like a firmware thing. Like they probably just need to adjust that in the
adjust
firmware.
the fan curve. And like the stuff that we shoot, either you're not using the audio or you're using external audio. You could turn that fan to normal to high, and it would probably be fine.
So there's that, and then the other thing he pointed out was if you take the CF Express card out, that really helps a lot.
And this thing can shoot to an SSD.
Yeah. Now, the one weird thing about shooting to an SSD is that in some of the modes, you have to power it with 2 batteries. Like, so you either have to use the battery grip or you have to use a dummy battery.
Which you can't use the dummy batteries out of the S5 II. You have to use a newer dummy battery that's built for this thing that delivers the right voltage, because this is pulling a different voltage off of that battery than like a standard. And yeah.
I think with all those changes, I think with setting the fan curve to normal, recording externally, and I think he may have used a dummy battery too. I'm not sure. I think he was like, he ran it for like 4 hours and then just stopped. So it seems like there's ways around the overheating.
But it's like, how much do you want to have to hack that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of the bummer of it, is like, does it make it feel compromised when you use it to have to do all these things?
Yeah, you'd have to run it through the paces and like test it, pull the screen out or rig it up and set the fan to normal and like just test the modes and see if you can shoot that 6K oversampled open gate and it'd be fine. But I don't know. That's something that you'd have to like dive into, or we have to see more testing on.
Yeah.
But I think we've spent a lot of time kind of like talking. I think everyone's talking about the video stuff on this because it's a Lumix camera. I think that the video stuff is not perfect, but it is as good as could be. It's maybe the best out of these high res. Like, I know I can't even say that because the R5 Mark II is thinking good with its stacked sensor. It is very competitive with its video features in one of these high resolution style cameras.
Yeah, I think I just think you can't especially on the video side, you can't only look at the specs of like the sensor and stuff, because when you're a real person using a camera, it's kind of like this whole end-to-end experience. It's not just like, what does the sensor give you? It's like, how is it to use? What assist features do you have? Like can you record externally? Like, it's all that kind of stuff too. And I mean, that's kind of the frustrating part for us as people who buy cameras, is that, you can't always get like the combination of everything you want. And for me, like, I could look at this and say, I think the Canon R5 II is it has better video features for what I want. But the fact is, like, I just don't really want to use a Canon R5 II. Like, there are other things about that system that don't excite me.
Yep.
And you end up having to make a trade-off somewhere.
Well, yeah, like you're getting, I mean, sure, you can get lumigraphs and stuff on and false color on the Canon now too, but like you get all that on the Lumix, and you get shutter angle and like the spot metering and all these sort of things.
That spot meter thing is just like one of the best video assist features
have we not
I've
confirmed
ever seen.
that like on like any camera you can set the focus point thing to somewhere on the camera and it will show the exposure for that point?
I mean, maybe you can, but it's like, this is an independent, like, separate thing. You can drag the little box around. Like, it's so easy to use. It works so well. Like,
it's a good interface for sure. So we've talked a lot about the video. I do want to kind of we'll wrap up 2 things on it, but I want to talk about the photo stuff, because like, this is a photo camera, Daniel. We're like over an hour into this thing. We haven't even talked about the photo stuff.
We knew any episode about a new Lumix camera was going to go long.
Yeah, and like when it was going to be all about the video stuff too, because it's video. I think that the Cinelike A2, like I've seen that profile in the raw photo stuff in Lightroom for the S5 Mark II, but supposedly this is new. They released a new, like you have your standard and your vivid and like Vlog. You have this new profile for video and I guess also photo. It's called Cinelike A2, and it's kind of like a flatter whatever. Supposedly, what they're doing is there's an airy log or airy like color thing where you can make you can take your Vlog and you apply an airy LUT to it, and then you get like an airy standard color profile, which is very pleasing, not oversaturated, very nice neutral type profile. And what supposedly this Cinelike A2 is essentially that. They're taking Vlog, they're applying the airy LUT to it, and then they're baking it in the video. I think this is awesome. I would shoot in that probably all the time. Actually, I would shoot in Vlog all the time, but still.
It kind of seems like, you know, the times when you maybe don't want to have to grade your footage. I feel like if you want to grade, like it's still hard to go wrong with Vlog, but if you want to be able to deliver quickly, it feels like maybe it gives you a more balanced look than like you're always talking about how the standard Lumix profile is very punchy, and it feels like this might be more of like a pleasing graded look. And I could picture us using it for delivering, you know, stuff where like we're not doing the editing.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like how Sony has that new S Cinetone, whatever.
Yeah, everyone's doing this.
It's Fujifilm has a Turna. Like everyone's kind of doing like, oh look, I think this one's going to be great. Other things that IBIS, they added a bunch of EIS, like electronic image stabilization modes.
Cropless EIS.
Yeah, cropless EIS because like you're shooting 8K on an 8.1K. You know, so what they're doing is they're taking advantage of like that extra real estate, so that you're not cropping, but you're getting EIS, and so
pretty interesting.
You have more boosted IBIS modes, and like the stabilization on this camera is just super duper good, which we were expecting.
And Panasonic's just like they're in a class of their own with IBIS. Like I was shooting the other night with the S9 on an 85 millimeter lens, and I mean, I've used the Fuji, you know, for years now. I still can't get as stable footage with the Fuji as I can with this tiny little like travel size Panasonic camera. I mean, it's just
Panasonic's just figured it out. Other cool thing, which I don't know if you've tried this on your Lumix yet or not, they do a thing where you can obviously like you can crop in video, but what it is like when you turn on the crop mode, you turn your zoom ring, and then whenever you get to the end of the zoom ring, because it's by wire, you just keep turning it, and then you zoom from 1 to 1.5x crop, and you can just like zoom into the crop, and it's not like hitting a punch where you just boom boom. You can like zoom from 1.5 all the way down to 1.
I don't know if that's how it works or not, because
it's how it works on this camera.
Interesting, because like the zoom lens I have for L mount is not zoom by wire. Like the lens physically moves when you zoom it. And so what I thought that thing did was, when you have it zoomed all the way in, like on my 20 to 60 lens, when you have it zoomed all the way in, it's doing a combination of optical and digital zoom.
Yeah, sure.
So that is the end of your like 1.5x plus basically, the full range. But it just kind of like interpolates to where like as you zoom through the range, like you're getting a wider zoom overall, and it's kind of like combining optical and digital zoom at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it does kind of depend upon the lens, but that's a cool feature versus like just like the straight up crop mode.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that with the S9 at some point, because there are limits to the crop mode. You know, it's not a free lunch. Like you definitely lose some quality, but you know, all kinds of stuff like that are good. Like it, if you provide it as a feature that I can turn on and off, I'm happy about that. Like, sure, give me those options, and sometimes they'll be useful, not all the time, but
yeah. Okay. One more thing on video. Vlog is at 400 ISO, which we kind of mentioned the base ISOs, but Vlog being at 400 ISO is amazing. You're going to get way lower noise at that low log. Like Nikon has that N-Log version where you can shoot at like 80 ISO still in log, and which is super, super, super cool. This is less ND, lower noise, cleaner log. Yeah. So Vlog at 400 ISO is top notch.
One thing people are hoping to see in an S1H Mark II is internal ND. I think Panasonic has a patent related to that, and I still think that'd be really exciting. But having the base ISO be 400 already feels like there are a lot of situations where you could shoot in log and not need an ND filter. Because with the XH2S, anytime you want to shoot off log 2, it's like if you're outside, you're gonna need an ND.
Yep, the 1250 is rough. Okay, so that's all done. Let's gotta talk about photo, Daniel.
Okay.
They made the AF better. Cool.
Yep.
They added high resolution still pixel shift, which I think is the first time we've seen this in full frame. And so you can do 176 megapixel stills.
I've never actually tried that feature on a camera. Sensor shift.
I've never had a camera that did it.
Yeah, I guess I haven't either. So. I always think that's interesting, but I guess it's good for like a landscape or something.
Mm-hmm. You can shoot 40 frames per second in electronic shutter, but the rolling shutter is so bad it's basically unusable.
Mm-hmm.
You can shoot with the mechanical shutter up to 10 frames per second, but if you're shooting more than 6 frames per second in mechanical shutter, you're going to lose bit rate of the raw files because it can't shoot fast. It can't process data fast enough. So if you want full bit rate raw files, I think it's like 6 frames per second roughly is what you have to shoot with. So it's like this can shoot 40 frames per second, but realistically you can only shoot 6 frames per second if you want actual full bit rate raw files.
Interesting.
Without rolling shutter.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it feels a little marketing-y, and I think that, like don't buy this for sports unless 6 frames per second is good enough.
Yeah. Like for me, totally not a factor. I so rarely shoot bursts, it's just not going to matter. But for some people, that is a key part of their workflow, and it's a little unfortunate, I guess, that this is coming out and that there's not an equivalent like sports related camera, because those people are kind of out of luck right now.
Sure. I mean, I don't know how many sports photographers are shooting with L mount anyways.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But the buffer on this is like 70 raw files, which is not good.
Yeah.
But it also kind of reflects the fact that like you're not going to shoot in the 40 frames per second e-shutter mode unless like you are in a pinch.
Yeah.
Because that's like 1.5 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's like the pre-shot buffer. I don't even think this thing does pre-shot, which is like also it's not a sport camera. It's not like, I mean, you probably shoot wildlife with it, but not as effectively. So like if you're shooting at 6 frames per second mechanical shutter, yeah, you can hold that shutter down for like 10 seconds and you're rocking and rolling and it's good and it's going to clear that buffer. But anything more than that, like the size of the buffer, the limitations on the speed, it's nice to give you the option, but this is a 5-6 FPS photo camera.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
Flash sync is 1/250, which like, okay, fine, because it's not a leaf shutter. It's a 350 shot rating from whatever, like SEPA, whoever does it, which is like, okay, it's not that great. The battery in this seems kind of limited.
Yeah.
Which is weird because like for your S9, that battery is rock and roll solid.
It's incredible how good the battery is in the S9. Like we shot that video the other day, 40 minutes recording, and I turned the camera on after that, and it's like, wait, did I charge this battery and not realize it? Because the battery's like barely feels like it's barely depleted.
1 out of the 6 bars is gone.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember that from the GH5 too. The GH5 had incredible battery life.
Yep.
And this one seems like it's fine but not great.
Yeah, it's just average. It's not amazing. So I mean, you'll get by. I think it's like you don't even get an hour of record time on 4K or whatever.
They did release a new battery grip. As an optional accessory. It's like a $300 or $400 accessory. And it gives you one. You can hold one extra battery in it. You can hot swap the battery. Has like the joystick and stuff if you want to hold it vertically. So like that is an available accessory. And then they also have the dummy battery.
And it is a lot smaller. Like the Sony cameras are pretty small. If you're comparing this to an A7R V, the Lumix is maybe like a 0.5 centimeter taller kind of thing, but basically like the same width, roughly the same weight. It is competitively sized. So adding a battery grip, maybe not the end of the world. Maybe most of the time, as long as you're not doing crazy heavy usage, the battery's probably fine.
I really liked the way I had my GH5 set up, where I bought a cage for the camera that was made for the battery grip, and I mounted a battery grip in the cage. And whenever I rigged my camera out that way, but then I could take the camera itself and I could just detach it from the battery grip and pull it out of that cage. And so that felt like a pretty cool solution, because if I needed a little compact camera, I could do that with like one thumb wheel.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to, like run for a long time with like a full camera rig, it was really easy to drop in there. And then I had that extra battery.
Yeah, that made a lot of sense. It was kind of cool. other things, just real quick, it's got the LUT Lab stuff, obviously.
Yep.
And you got blackout-free shooting modes whenever you are shooting in that super slow burst mode. So that's kind of like the rough overview of the photo. Like, it's going to be Lumix photos, which are generally pretty punchy, but also neutral. They don't really lean, cool or warm. Like, Canons tend to lean warm as far as their JPEG modes. But like the standard Lumix profile looks good. It's super punchy. You shoot in Vivid and it's like out of control punchy. But like they added the Cinelike A2, so you can even shoot that in photo mode, or you can do your own LUT stuff. So I think generally speaking, as a photo camera, as long as it's not, like birding, like fast wildlife, and it's not like sports or race cars or whatever, this is going to be good general purpose photo camera, high resolution still camera. I think it's a good release. And like you have a lot of really good lens options with L mount. So I think competitively on a price standpoint, this is going to beat out Sony and Canon on price. I don't think it's necessarily going to beat out Nikon, because like you could get a Z8 probably on sale for almost the same price. Yeah. And Nikon has a lot of those, like you can get like the cheaper fast zooms, like the 17 to 28 and the 28 to 70 2.8 lenses, which aren't like their S-line lenses, but they're good enough. And those are going to be probably cheaper than the equivalent new L mount 2.8 lens. And so like price wise, I think that if you're getting into like Nikon's probably the most competitive thing to this camera, because you can get 4 more megapixels and get a system at roughly the same price with a stacked sensor.
Right.
It's like maybe a tough call there. And like you get a lot of like with red and all this sort of thing and raw, the video features on the Nikon Z8 are really, really compelling, but the like user video features as far as the meters and all those settings on the Lumix are probably better. And so it's like, I think that the most interesting comparison to this camera for me is the Z8.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I'm really glad they came in with this at 3,300 rather than like 3,500, 3,600. I think it's obviously an expensive camera. I mean, neither you or I have purchased a camera that expensive yet. But it feels like it's more approachable, whereas like at 3,500 or above, that feels like I've got to be like really excited about what I'm getting to make that worth it.
Yeah, I did do a quick comparison to the S1R Mark II and the Z8, because I do think that is the most apt comparison. And like the Z8 came out like almost 2 years ago at this point, and so it's a year and a half. It is getting a little older, and so like for whatever $200 or $300 less, you're getting that super cool flippy screen. You're getting a higher resolution EVF. You're getting open gate recording. You can record to SSD. You have like twice as many focus points for the face detect, and you're getting in-camera focus stacking. The Nikon focus stacking stuff sucks.
Really?
You have to like use their computer app, which is terrible, and like you can do in-camera focus stacking with the S1R, and you can't do it on the Z8, and the S1R has better IBIS.
You also you get the support for 32-bit audio recording if you use that.
So it's like the S1R is cheaper, has a slower sensor, but it also has a lot of features that the Z8 just doesn't have. And so like the Z8 is going to win on as far as like speed.
Yeah.
But if speed isn't the most important thing and video features are ignoring the rolling shutter concept, S1R is maybe more compelling in some cases. So
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to, do you need the speed with the stack sensor? Whenever
I went to do this comparison, I was expecting the Z8 to hands down dominate the S1R Mark II, and then I started comparing specs and features, and I was like, oh, actually the S1R Mark II is kind of better in a lot of ways, and it's cheaper.
Interesting.
And I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. I think one other thing we should mention in this conversation is, so this camera came out, and before we end the day, this is a long episode, it is what it is, but I do want to talk about like, is this the camera for me or not? I think that's kind of an interesting topic, but
sure.
Before we get to that, I think it's worth mentioning, like, is there going to be an S1H Mark II? And like, was that this camera? And like what's going on? And I think it's interesting that Cinedy did a interview with somebody from Panasonic, like one of their marketing guys. And he basically, I was surprised that he said this as clearly as he did, but he basically did say there will be a new S1H at some point, and kind of sounded like they had the sensor they wanted for this camera, And so that's why this camera is getting released. It sounded like they would potentially be using a different sensor for the S1H Mark II, and that sensor's just not ready yet, or they're not done developing. So I think there is an S1H II coming at some point, more clearly than maybe what we've heard before. But we have no idea what the timeline is. That could be 2 years away.
It could be 2 years away. So now that you're massively invested in L mount now.
Deeply invested in L mount. I have as many L mount lenses as I do X mount.
Yep. And we both know that you're just such a giant Lumix fanboy. You want to dump all that dumb Fuji stuff as fast as possible.
I've been honestly very surprised at how much I've enjoyed using the S9. I mean, I knew obviously I wouldn't have bought the camera if I didn't think I would like it, but it's been like really, really surprising to me that just using the menus, like going through the settings and stuff, I did so much of my initial shooting on the GX85 and the GH5, and I guess I just really imprinted on those things, and it felt like
it's like going home.
It feels like putting on an old pair of jeans, like everything just is exactly where I want it to be. It all makes sense to me. I really like the images I get out of it, and I've just been having a lot of fun shooting with the S9, and I've had some stuff recently, where I was shooting like event video, and I took the S9 with me instead of the XH2S just to try it out, and like it was fun and it worked well, and I don't know, I do like Panasonic a lot, and it does make me want to like move in that direction, I guess.
And yeah, it makes sense. I mean, from a video perspective, like if you're going to shoot open gate and don't want to worry about overheating, and you want more dynamic range and faster rolling shutter performance and better codecs and all that sort of stuff, like obviously you're going to shoot with the Fuji XH2S.
Like if you want the better camera, you just use the XH2S, right?
Sure. But I mean, you clearly want to move forward to something inferior. And I mean, I'm all for encouraging that. I'm mostly just trying to like talk you off the edge of buying a Pixis so that I don't have to deal with the files. But like it's obvious you have the edge. And so I don't quite know what for you to do here. Whenever this released on, what was it, Tuesday?
Yeah.
And we were talking about it and I was watching all the videos and looking at it. I was like, this is obviously not the camera for Daniel. And the S1H2 is going to come one day, and that's clearly the camera for Daniel, and he needs to start saving up his pennies. So I think it's going to cost like $4,000. But I don't. It's not going to come this year. I would guess.
Yeah.
That the S1H Mark II is not a 2025 camera.
So there is a pretty seems like a pretty strong rumor that they will announce an L mount camera in April. Which NAB is in April, but so it could be then, but it also seems like I have a hard time imagining that they would have released a camera at this price point and not hinted stronger at that if that was coming 2 months later, because there would be some people that would buy this camera and be very upset. I want a more video, more professional video camera from Panasonic. This is better than the S5 Mark II in some ways, not always. Maybe this is like the better, like the next option for me. And then they come out in S1H Mark II and it's like, well, shoot. Yeah. I think they would have teased it if it was coming 2 months from now.
So you don't think that they're going to tease it in April of this year? Because like that might be the other thing is if they did that, people would maybe not buy this camera and wait for that one.
Yeah.
But if they're going to pre-announce it in April and then not ship it until February. I was reaching for February and I couldn't say the month. February 2026.
Yeah.
Like now you have people not buying a Lumix camera for a year.
Yeah.
And that could be a problem.
It's hard to say. I don't know.
So I think that based upon how like they came out with the S5 Mark II and I was like, this is it. They're going to release S1H this year. And that was 2023. And we're in 2025 and it still hasn't happened. I don't think Panasonic's in a hurry.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
And yeah, they're going to come out with an S1H Mark II, and yeah, they're probably going to come out with a box version of it that's going to be super duper slick. And I think the box version of that camera is like maybe your next camera. I think that the XH2S is still super duper good, and you could just use that camera and wait for the camera that you want. But if you were like dead set on, I'm ready to go Panasonic, I don't think that you're necessarily at a loss switching to the S1R II. I think that it is like the high resolution still, you're going to get really good photos out of it. So whenever you do need to do the next like photo shoot, that will be the camera you pick up because it's going to be great in low light and it's going to produce amazing stills and like it'll be perfect for that over something like the S9, which will be like your little travel camera. And so I think that like there is a room for this if like you had the S1R Mark II and then you also had an S1H Mark II when it eventually came out, because then you would have like a really good pro set of camera pair with the S9 as like your little bonus travel cam.
Interesting.
Which then you would have 3 cameras, which, you know, I'm not going to...
A lot of cameras.
A lot of cameras, right? Like how many cameras does Daniel need? And the answer is 3. Anyways, I think that there's room for that if you wanted to like make that move. But I also think that, you know, $3,300 is not a small amount of money.
Yeah.
And the XH2S is, in my opinion, still a better video camera than this camera right now in certain ways.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. In certain,
Asterisk, double dagger.
in certain ways, I think it's not as good in low light, and it doesn't have as many assist features, which are two like,
and it doesn't
kind of important things.
doesn't shoot 8K.
Yeah.
So it does match perfectly with my XH2S, which makes my life easier.
There we go.
So we'll see after this next project that we're working on how perfect I can match the
because we shot like
vlog.
almost the exact same angle with the S9 and one of the XH2Ss so that we could see kind of how that matches up.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that I can match that imperceptibly.
Yep.
And if that's the case, then like there's nothing stopping you.
I feel like I've got maybe three possible. One possible path is just don't do anything, but like that's boring, right? So if I was to get something, I feel like I've got like 3 possible paths. Where one would be get an S5 II or 5.2X as like a stopgap until something like the S1H2 comes out, and that way I've got like a full body size camera that can do video decently well, can do photos.
It's such a good camera.
And pretty low price, like new, it's $1,900.
I mean, you could basically get that for a wash. Like you could sell your XH2S, you could sell some of your lenses to me, some of your lenses to the world, and it would essentially cost you nothing.
Yeah. So that's one option. Another option would be to get this S1R Mark II. You've done a pretty good job of convincing me that some of the downsides aren't really that big of a deal. So I think there's an argument to be made there.
And I think that some of the video features you get off the S1R Mark II are better than the S5.
Yeah, I think so. I would say it's a better video camera than the S5, but it's more expensive too. So like, value wise, it's harder to say maybe. Yep. And I think we'd have to wonder, like, does it make sense to keep the Fuji? And the other thing I'd wonder with that is the S1R Mark II kind of a stopgap for me until the S1H Mark II comes out?
I think it depends a lot on like how much you want to move into that system and how like ready you are to make that move. Because there's a world where I potentially buy your Fuji and then I just have 2 matching bodies.
Yeah.
Which I don't need 3 cameras, Daniel. But also like I don't necessarily want to sleep on the concept of Daniel has to pull the ripcord on Fuji as soon as possible, and having 2 XH2Ss to do the interview stuff is like, I'll just bring my 2 cameras and like it'll be fine. Could work as like we still stick with the A/B shots on the Fujis until we have enough Lumix cameras to switch it over to Lumix.
Yeah.
And then I sell the whole kit and switch to Nikon.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Because like for me, like I think a lot of it comes down to the color matching. Because for me, it takes away some of the benefit of upgrading if I don't feel like we're getting any value for like our bread and butter, video interview type stuff.
Yep.
I would say the third option would be the Pixis, which you kind of alluded to earlier. And the reason I say that, I've kind of done more thinking about like, does that camera make sense? How would that camera fit into into my lifestyle? And I feel like the Pixis is such a different camera than, anything we've talked about, that it can't be like a replacement. It's more of like an additional, like this is a new thing that does something different.
It would open up different workflow options for us for shooting, like taking on new clients and shooting different things that aren't like mirrorless camera type things. It's more of like raw workflows and kind of more professional narrative type, like higher quality. It's like the next tier up.
I think the stuff we do, like the interview type videos that we do, and maybe like the music video stuff, I think the Pixis would be an excellent camera for that, because I think you do maybe have like a higher bar of image quality with it, and it's easier to rig up. And like I think about my XH2S rig where I have a V-mount battery and all that stuff, and a Pixis would fit in like really well with that setup. And I could see having that just for those use cases, and then keep using either the S9 or the XH2S for like the event filming stuff, and just kind of go that route. And the Pixis, I think, is a great value. It's surprisingly affordable for what it is, but it does feel more risky in the sense of you're kind of committing to a more involved workflow.
Yeah, you really are, and it's tough. It makes some of like the running gun stuff maybe a little harder because you now have like this full rig. You have to have the whole monitor solution. It doesn't have as good of autofocus or any autofocus compared to something like the Lumix. And so it does make that a lot more difficult.
I don't think it doesn't make sense for like a quick event, like a quick turnaround event shooting.
No.
Like I think for a music video it does, but not for, like that. I would still need a regular camera to do event stuff.
It makes sense for a high quality produced project, not a recap video.
Yeah. Yeah. Which like, I guess where I end up on that is work that I would like for us to do.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not something that we do a lot of. I mean, our interview stuff is that, but like we're happy with what we're getting from the Fujis now. And so,
but maybe like that is like the next step up in quality.
But it's like, is it a chicken and egg thing? Like if we had the camera, would we start doing things with it that made sense for it? But I guess like where I kind of get stuck is the S1R II is $3,300. The Pixis is $3,000. Like the Pixis is going to require rigging, but like, let's just for the sake of argument say like the prices are fairly comparable. Which one, which one opens more interesting doors? Like which one's more fun to play with? Like I think that's the question.
I mean, something we're going to have to talk about and think about for a little while and figure out. I do kind of like the idea of like, what if we both went that way and we got two Pixises for the business and just kind of
that'd be interesting.
Just went all in and shot and be raw.
Just embrace it.
We could totally do that. I do think that we would see a substantial jump in image quality from what we're doing now. Even though like the stuff we shoot looks good in my opinion, I think we could really make it even better. So I don't know. That's something we'll have to figure out.
Yeah.
You can get an S5 II not X from KEH for $1,420, and you can get from B&H an S5 II X for $1,670.
I mean, those are pretty good prices, like
it's so cheap. It is still kind of the best full frame camera for the money right now.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting point. Like for me, I mean, honestly, like even if we did this Pixis thing, like I could see a world where I sell the XH2S, get a Pixis, and then just kind of like at some point also pick up the S5 IIX to have as like, this is my photo and event camera.
Right, because you're in L mount. Like you get the thing. Like sure, you get the Pixis in EF mount, but and I know that like it's locking EF, which has a lot of benefits. In my opinion, shorter flange back is going to be sharper. Yeah, get it in L mount.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather converge to one system. Anyway, but that's that. Like I honestly think S1R Mark II versus S5 IIX is really kind of the decision I would have to make, because I feel like the S5 IIX gets close enough to the video features of the S1R II that you suddenly have to wonder, is this worth paying twice as much for the S1R II?
It's tough, and I would say that probably not, unless you really needed the photo camera.
Yeah, and
it's not as better video features as something like an S1H is going to be.
And that's where I think that this camera's in a weird spot, because I think there aren't as many big photographers on Lumix. I feel like their feature set has been so aimed toward video that most of the people shooting them are like at least 50-50 photo and video, if not more on the video side. Because I feel like photo-oriented people are more likely to be on Canon, Nikon, or Sony. And it just feels like this camera doesn't offer... Like for its price, I don't feel like it offers the right set of those trade-offs for those video people.
Sure, like if you're an 80-20 video person, maybe the S5 is like better bang for the buck and that's where you go. But if you're like 60/40 video photo and you need a high resolution camera, like this feels like a great solution.
That's true. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad camera. I would definitely obviously I'm considering it. I just don't. It's not a slam dunk.
Yeah, like from like comparatively, like on the Fuji side, I have an X-T5 that we shoot a little bit of video with it, but that thing is super compromised in video, less so than this, which is like, I see these kind of as an equivalent. The XH2 not S is probably the equivalent of this, because you like get the 8K modes and that sort of stuff, and like there is maybe like a version of, but I feel like most of these high resolution cameras are pretty compromised in video, and I think you're compromising maybe like a little less with the S1R Mark II.
Yeah, I think so too. I do think it's closer to a 50-50 split than some of the others.
Yeah,
I just don't know if there's as many Lumix shooters that are looking for that camera, but I don't know.
Sure. So, I mean, we're gonna have to wrap here, Daniel. This is our longest episode ever, which is great.
It's unsurprising, I would say.
Yep. So 10 out of 10 for that. I would say, let's maybe final thoughts on S1R Mark II. Where are you landing on this as far as like, are you positive, negative? Do you think this was, do you think they should have done things differently? Do you think this was the right compromise?
I think I sort of just answered some of that, where like, I feel like most of their audience wants something a little different. I think that kind of a shadow has been cast over this release because of the S1H2 being so conspicuously absent. And I think that if they had more clarity around, this is the R version, there is an H version coming at X time, at whatever time, like I think people would be feeling better about it. But I think right now there's still a lot of people that feel like, wait, is this the S1H Mark II? And if so, why is it so disappointing? So I kind of think that like maybe messaging wise, they might have misstepped a little bit there. But in terms of the camera's features and its price point, I think it's very competitive. I think you get a lot for your $3,300. I think our conversation today kind of illustrates that on the video side, it's really not that compromised. And it probably is the best video camera that Panasonic makes right now. Not to say that like, I think it still has some trade-offs, but I think it's like better for video than the S5 IIX. And so like it's a step forward in that direction too. And it's obviously a lot better for photo. So, I mean, overall, I think it's a good release for them. I just personally was wanting a different set of trade-offs for what I want a camera for.
Sure. I think I'm very positive on this, which I didn't think is where I was going to land at the end of the week. I thought I was going to be super negative on this camera, especially coming out of Gerald's video. I think it's kind of hard to say that this is the better video camera over the S5 because of some of those rolling shutter trade-offs. But I think that if you need high resolution video or you need like really good oversampled videos, this is extremely compelling. And I mean, it has R in the name. This is the photo camera.
Yeah.
That should be pretty obvious. It's just Panasonic is fighting their reputation as a video company. And they kind of just have to work within those constraints. I think if I was in their shoes, I would have made all the exact same trade-offs. And I think that like using the Ronin camera sensor was probably the right call, not going stacked, getting that price down, all of that stuff. I think this is exactly what this camera needed to be, but it is not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I was expecting a 63 megapixel sensor that was worse at video or a stack sensor that was better at video. And it's neither of those things. So I was like, not maybe like a little disappointed, a little confused as to what this camera was, because it was not what I thought it was going to be. And the more that I dig into it and understand the features and what the release is, I think it's all the right trade-offs. And I mean, I think this is a very good release from Panasonic in general. And this is exactly what the S1R II needed to be.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Let's get out of here.
That's it for the show today. Thanks for joining us. And if you liked it, tell a friend so they can check it out too. You can find out more about the show at www.cameragearpodcast.com, and you can find us on Twitter @CameraGearPod. We'll be back with more next week.